Okay, so first things first, thank you, Rabbi Levi, for organizing this Kinus Torah. And second of all, thank you for inviting me to participate. Okay, so the title is SHLICHUS, the highest calling. So I figured after I landed on the topic, I assume there might be somebody who might think, yeah, might be wondering, well, SHLICHUS, isn't that synonymous nowadays with Lubavitch? So why would a Lubavitcher speaking in a Chabad house, why would he have a question mark here? Why is this not just a statement? So I'll explain where the question comes from. Okay. So we have at this time of year, we have a custom to learn Pirkei Avos. Every Shabbos we learn a different chapter. And just last Shabbos we finished the first cycle, and towards the end of that tractate, you have a Mishnah that, at first glance, seems to challenge the concept of shlichus. So it's important to mention when I talk about shlichus. So I mean there are two aspects to shlichus. First of all, just anybody who takes to heart the Rebbe's message and feels a responsibility to reach out to someone else, even somebody who just appreciates the need to reach out to others, to bring Yiddishkeit to them, that person's a shaliach, and anything they do towards that goal, that in a sense is a shlichus. But of course, there are those people who dedicate their lives to this purpose, so much so that they're willing to leave their own community and go establish a vibrant Jewish community in a place where there may be nothing. So that being said, we come across this mission at the end of, almost at the very end of Pirkei Avos. It's source number 1. And I'll read the first half of it. That'll be enough to get a sense of what's going on. I'll read it in English. It says, Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma said, once I was walking on the road when a certain man met me. He greeted me shalom, and I returned his greeting shalom. He said to me, Rabbi, from what place are you from? Where are you from? I said to him, I'm from a great city of scholars and sages. He said to me, Rabbi, if you'd be willing to live with us in our place, I would give you 1,000,000 golden dinars, precious stones and pearls. I replied, even if you were to give me all the silver and gold, precious stones and pearls in the world, I would dwell nowhere but in a place of Torah. And so it's written in the book of Psalms by David, king of Israel. And he goes on and he brings different psukim verses to prove his point. Source number 2, we don't have to go through it, but it's just one example of many commentaries that say, you know what the takeaway is from this Mishnah? Ein li dar ela b'makom Torah. Right? It's when Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma says, I will only live in a place of Torah. My place is amongst it's those who keep Torah, keep mitzvahs. And as this commentary says, it's not my business necessarily to go out. My heart might be in the right place, but there could be dangers in that. I think I'm influencing them positively. They might influence me negatively. So a Jew's place, their ideal is in a makom Torah. Okay. Now that's not wrong, right? That's not unwise. Right? A person has to know their limits. And of course, when you live with people who are like-minded and have the same principles as you, of course, you're going to be strengthened by that. But I mean, a chassid reading this mission has got to be thinking, what about shlichus? What about shlichus? Right? It's a perfect setup. Here's a Jew looking to a rabbi, please come, learn with us, bring Torah to our community, right? You don't even have to worry about the fundraising. It's perfect. So you just kind of read this and you wish Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma would say, yes, of course, I'm going. Okay. So what I wanted to do with you this evening is to analyze this mission a little closer and see, is that really the takeaway, right? Ein li dar ela b'makom Torah. Is there any other way to read this Mishnah that it doesn't challenge shlichus? Or even better, maybe it promotes it and encourages it. Right. So to understand the Mishnah, you have to understand Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma a little bit. So who was Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma? So unfortunately, Chazal don't really apply. They don't give us extensive biographies. What you have to do, you take a story from the Gemara, from the Medrash, an anecdote here, and you have to tease out a fact here and there. So source number 3 is a passage from the Babylonian Talmud, the Masechet Avodah Zarah. And I gave you the whole story here because it's a very moving story. It's a very special story. We won't go through it, but I'll pull out a fact here and there that's needed. But just some background. This takes place after the Bar Kokhba revolt, which happened between 132 and 136 of the Common Era. That was about the third and the final battle that the Jews tried to kick out the Roman Empire from Eretz Yisrael. So even though initially it was very successful, sadly it failed in the end. And the aftermath was with Herod, who was the Roman emperor at the time. So he went and he exacted his revenge first against anybody who rebelled, and in particular the rabbis who publicly supported Bar Kokhba. And so it's at this time we have many of the Asara Harigei Malchus, many of the 10 martyrs that we read about on Yom Kippur. So many of them are from this time. So this story is about one of those martyrs. It's not Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma. Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma, he does pass away in this story, but he's not on the Roman hit list. And basically what you need to know from here is that since this period is known as the Hadrianic persecutions, okay? And it was a time when also when there was a public ban on the public study of Torah. But because we know that Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma dies at this time, so that gives us an approximate sense of when he lived. So these persecutions took place between 136, 138 of the Common Era. We don't know that Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma, the Gemara doesn't tell us that he was particularly young or particularly very old. So it's fair to assume that he was probably born sometime around the destruction of the second base of Mikdash in 70 CE, either a little before or a little bit after. But we have his place in history, okay? And we'll come back to that. The second thing to draw out is there's, where I put that asterisk, so there's a line that's underlined there, and it says, when Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma passed away, it says, V'halchu kol gedolei Romi l'kavrei. So all the great dignitaries of Rome went to bury him. They spiduhu hesped gadol, and they gave him hesped, they eulogized him, they showed him great honor. So it's from here that the commentaries know that he was a great Jewish leader, and he was a spokesperson, and he was an intermediary for the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael and the Romans. So the truth is, if somebody is going to be able to deal with the Romans and earns their respect at a particular time when they're your enemy, so it's probably fair to say that Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma was something of a good diplomat. He was very cautious, he was very careful, he knew how to speak. In fact, we didn't have time, but if you take a lot of the statements that he makes across the Talmud, you find many times that is his style. He's very guarded, he's very cryptic. We'll see an example of that a little later. He's a cautious speaker. And when you're dealing with Roman politicians and Roman generals, so in as much as being a careful speaker, you also have to be a careful listener. But just to underscore that with a personal anecdote. So my grandfather was born and raised in Hungary. And he, during the 1930s, he was a political party. In the 1940s, he survived the Holocaust, managed to escape the forced labor. He was captured by the Soviets. He spent time in the Gulag, came back to Hungary, spent about a decade under the communists. And then in 1956, when the revolution, the Hungarian Revolution broke out, the Soviet tanks rolled in. He figured he had enough excitement for one lifetime. He took my grandmother, my father, and he came to Canada. So like any immigrant or refugee new to a place, you have to adapt yourself to a new culture and the way of thinking of things. And one of the observations he had early on, so he mentioned to my father, he said, Canadians, they're so dumb, they're so naive. So my dad said, what makes them so dumb and naive? He says, well, you talk to them in politics, and they'll give you their opinion, and you'll say, so what are you basing that on? He says, I read it in a newspaper. So my grandfather, thinking where he comes from with his experiences, he read it in a newspaper. Couldn't think, what kind of educated person assumes that what he's reading there is exactly what's happened? Said, where we come from, if you have any hope of getting anything out of the newspaper, you don't read the lines, you have to read in between the lines. And I think that's probably a good way to describe Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma. Okay? He was very subtle, he was very adept at reading in between the lines. Okay, so why is all this important? So anybody who's ever studied a Mishnah knows the Mishnayos tend to be very succinct, pithy, to the point. They're not verbose. They say what they need to say in as few words as possible. But this Mishnah, we have this whole conversation, this seemingly useless conversation. There's so much information in there that do we really need it? Like, why do we need to know that this Jew says, he said hi to me, I said hi back to him, said, where are you from? He gave him a vague answer. What's that about? So there are a whole host of commentaries that say, if the whole point of this Mishnah was Ein lidar ela b'makom Torah, and he wants to set the context, so he could have just said, a Jew once stopped me on the road. Let's just say he offered me a lot of money to go, and I didn't want to go. But these commentaries say no. We know Rebbi Yosay ben Kisma, right? You have to read between the lines. He's giving us this conversation because this is the conversation he had, and he saw something in this conversation, and we also have to read into it. And in that way, it's not so much that the point is about Ein lidar ela b'makom Torah. It's not a principle you can never leave this community to help anybody else. Maybe that's what he's telling this particular Jew. So just to give a few examples, what do they read in between the lines? So in the 19th century, there was a great Rosh Yeshiva, a great Rav in Preshburg, today Bratislava. He's known as Ksav Sofer. So he says, you know what the problem is? Hagabi Adam Achad. But it says, I bumped into a Jew. It says, that's the way you pick your rabbi? You're picking somebody who's responsible for the spiritual well-being of your community. You make a committee, you make an interview, you invite people to the town. You don't just pick them up off the street. So that's the first red flag. Not Rebbi Yosef ben Kisma would have picked up on. There's a late 1700s, there was a Hasidic sefer, the Arvei Nachal. He says, you know what, another thing going on here, this Jew says, come be a rabbi in our place. And the word is bimkomenu. So yeah, bimkomenu does mean in our place, but it can have a little bit of a double meaning. Bimkomenu can also mean instead of us. In other words, they're looking for a rabbi who's going to come, who's going to be the holy guy sitting in the shul, we'll benefit from his merits, but we're not really interested in doing much. We'll go about our business, we'll do what we need to do. Right? Others say, he talks about come be a rabbi for us, but I'll pay you. Right? I'm going to be holding the purse strings. So when you read it this way, these commentaries say, it's much less about I will never live in a Makom Torah, but it's more about, it becomes a mission about defending the integrity of Torah, knowing you can't partner with everybody, and a shaliach, a chassid reading it that way, okay, you could live with that interpretation. It's not saying you can never go on SHLICHUS, you should never leave the Torah community. You can, but something, I could be inspired by Rebbi Yosef ben Kisma. I'm going to defend the Torah. I can't compromise my values. I have to defend the integrity of Torah, just like Rebbi Yosef ben Kisma. Okay, so if we left it there, we could live with that. But we won't leave it there. Okay. There's a beautiful chiddush that was introduced first by Rabbi Yisrael Rubin. Rabbi Rubin is a former Montrealer, and his insight is all the more special because he's a shliach himself in Albany and Saratoga Springs, New York. And we can appreciate his answer because we've already started to get to know Rebbi Yosef ben Kisma a little bit, and we know he speaks carefully. You have to read his words carefully. And if that's the case, when you look at this conversation, did he ever explicitly say, no, I'm not going? No, he didn't say that. And if that's the case, then you could read the conversation. We just inferred it because he says, you can give me all the money in the world, but I'm only going to live in a place of Torah. But the truth is you could read the Mishnah as saying, when this Jew makes the proposal, so he says, here, take $1 million. And his response to that is, look, you can give me all the money in the world. That's not what's going to motivate me to go. I'm not about money. Ein li dar ela b'makom Torah. The only thing that motivates me, if I'm going someplace, I will only live in a place of Torah. So if I go with you, you have to know, I'm going to transform your town. We're going to work, we're going to build it, we're going to do something there. That's beautiful. And then if you could read it that way, and then he actually went, that's great. It goes on SHLICHUS, it's perfect. The only question is there any proof? So according to Rabbi Reuben, there is. So if you look at source number 4, this is also from the Babylonian Talmud. This is from the last parak in Masechet Sanhedrin, the famous parak of Chelik. This is where we have many of the famous teachings of Mashiach, about Mashiach, the Chachamim tell us when he's coming and other things. So at the bottom, where it has the asterisks, it says, and this one is worth, we'll go through it a little bit. It says, Shalu Talmidav es Rebbi Yosef ben Kisma. So the students asked our sage, Rebbi Yosef ben Kisma, Emosai ben David ba, when's Mashiach coming? Says to them, Amar Misyara ani Shema Mitzvakshena Memen Os. Oh wait, you guys looking for some heavenly sign from me? Because the rabbis generally didn't like giving heavenly signs like that. To that they said, Amrulo Einanu Merakshin Muchales. No, don't worry, we're not asking for a sign. We just want to know, when's Mashiach coming? So shouldn't be a surprise. His answer is somewhat cryptic, but he tells them, Amalei Kishipol Hashar Hazeh. He says, when this gate falls, Vibonen is built up, Vipol, Vibonen falls a second time, is built up a second time, Vipol falls a third time, they must speak in Yosay Sheben David Ba. They won't be able to put it back up until Mashiach comes. Okay, and we'll get back to that statement. Then they go on to say, so Amrulo, Ravenu, 10 lanois. So okay, now, Rebbe, give us a sign. He says, hey, come on. Amar lehem, v'lo kach amartem li she'en atem mevakshim memeni. Didn't you just tell me you're not going to ask me for a sign? They said, Amrulo yafa pichem. Yeah, we did, but still, give us a sign. So Amar lehem im kach. He says, okay, if you really need it that badly, yahaftu mei maras pamias ledam. So let the waters of the cave of Pamias turn to blood. So the Pamias is what we call today the Banyas, if you know the Israeli geography in the north. And so it should turn temporarily to blood, and so it did, turned to blood. Okay, and we'll go on because this is also going to be important. B'shas p'tirasa amar lehem hamikuli areini. At the time of his passing, Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma told his students, bury my grave deep in the ground. Okay, actually, I'll paraphrase this because it'll go a little quicker. Here he's saying that he's giving them another sign. Before Mashiach comes, it's preceded by a war known as Gog and Magog. And there's a debate, who exactly are these nations? So Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma held these are the Persians and the Medes. So what he's saying now is, bury me deep in the ground. He says, because when these armies are coming to conquer Eretz Yisrael, he says there's not going to be a tree in Babylon that the Persians aren't going to tether their horses to. And when the Medes get to Eretz Yisrael, they're going to dig up all the graves and they're going to use the coffins as feeding troughs for their horses. So consequently, bury my grave deep in the ground. Okay, so it's not defiled. Okay, so go back for a minute. What did he mean when he said this gate falls and is rebuilt and falls and rebuilt? So you have in the left corner here where the other asterisk is, you have Rashi, but it's also on the other page, a little bigger, after the English translation. And Rashi says, Hashar Hazeh, you know what this gate is? Shel Ir Romi. These are the gates of Rome. Should be Ir Romi Haya Oso Kshar, because in Rome there happen to be these gates. So first of all, so we can appreciate Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, really what he means, he's referring to the Roman Empire. But we know he's too smart to publicly say that when the Roman Empire falls and gets back up and falls. So he's pointing to the gates of Rome, and it's an allusion to the Roman Empire. But according to Rashi, Rabbi Yossi is sitting in Rome. Okay, that's Rashi, 11th century France. See Rabbi Levi, Shabbos afternoons from Meet the Giants, for more on Rashi. Okay, so jump ahead a few centuries, late 16th century, early 17th century Poland. We have Shmuel Edel's, the famous Maharsha. He says, I don't understand this Rashi. Rashi, how could Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma be in Rome? Because first of all, what did we just read in the Gemara in Sanhedrin? When Rabbi Yossi said, when I pass on, when I die, make sure to put my grave deep in the ground, because when the armies come to Eretz Yisrael, they're going to dig up all the graves. So it sounds like he's in Eretz Yisrael. Moreover, what sign did he give his students? He said, when the banyas turns to blood. So if he's sitting in Rome, what good is it giving a sign hundreds of kilometers away? So obviously he must be in the vicinity. Moreover, says the Maharsha, Rashi, what about the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos? Didn't Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma say, I'm from a big city of scholars and sages, and I only live in a Makom Torah? Now, Rome had Jews, and there were Chachamim who used to visit Rome, but it's not a Makom Torah. Certainly nothing compared. If there's any Torah going on, there's nothing compared to what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. So Maharsha is wondering, Rashi doesn't make any sense. Okay? And he leaves it as a question. So jump ahead 150 years. So we're in Minsk, today in present-day Belarus. There's a great rabbi there, Rabbi Yechiel Halpern. He writes a work called the Seder Hadoros. Part of that work is an encyclopedia of the sages of the Talmud. And in his entry on Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, he has a 4-page analysis picking up the question of the Maharsha. And you have here his conclusion. He says, no, Rashi's correct. The Maharsha just didn't understand something. It's true, Romi does mean Rome. But Rashi didn't mean Rome, Italy. He meant there's a place in Eretz Yisrael called Rome. And we don't have to go through the source number 7 and 8, just to save some time, but it's just to show you that writing in the early 1700s, so Rabbi Halpern didn't have the resources probably to know it, but by the early 20th century, everybody's in agreement. Romi is not a proper name. Romi is actually a nickname the Jews gave to Caesarea, right? And as the name implies, Caesarea, Caesar, that was the Roman administrative capital of Eretz Yisrael. So Caesarea, yeah, thank you. That's how we say it in English. So he's in Caesarea. So to take that back to the Maharsha, so that explains one first thing. So that it fits with the Gemara. Rashi said he's in Romi, he's in Eretz Yisrael. It fits with the context of the Gemara. But we still have a problem. How does that answer the second point? You know, Caesarea at this point it's not a Makom Torah now, and that wouldn't make sense. I mean, at the time when the Romans are fighting with the Jews, it makes sense. They have Bnei Brak, they have a Lakewood in their backyard. Doesn't fit. So what's Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma doing there? Says Rabbi Reuben, we know what he's doing there. He got invited by this Jew to Caesarea. He went on SHLICHUS. So now, if you can make a pretty decent argument that Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma did take this Jew's offer, another very interesting thing happens. So when you read this Mishnah, and as many do, and they assume, you know what, Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, he didn't go. If you assume he didn't go, then you have 2 ways to look at the Mishnah, and you have those 2 approaches we saw before. So you'll say, okay, well, why didn't he go? So either you'll say, it's the question, why would he go? Shouldn't leave him Makom Torah. No problem. Or you'll say, well, 1 second, there's nothing wrong inherently with going to help a community, teach them Torah, to build up. So why didn't he go? Must be this Jew, right? And you read between the lines, but the exercise becomes at every stage you look at this conversation, you're always looking for the negative. What's he doing? What's he saying wrong? What's he doing wrong? What's worrying Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma? And at the end of it, you have a Jew who comes across very arrogant. Just, he thinks he can just pick off the first black hatter off the street, throw a bunch of money at him. But now that you could say that Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma actually went, so you can look at the conversation a little different. So if you give me a few more minutes, let's go back to source 1, and we'll go through the commentaries. We'll go through the conversation. We'll use the classic commentaries, and we'll read between the lines. But we'll see if we can see something else going on here. This is partly, yeah. Yeah, partly. Okay, this part not so much. Okay, so it says, I'm a Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. So one time I was walking on the way. So some say this is just it's just a way of speaking. It happened once in the 15th century. We had the Abarbanel, great Rav, great sage. He says no, Pamachas, that's literal. With Yosef ben Kisma, he was always in the base medrash. He was always studying. He wasn't traveling around. This is the one time he ventured out, and this is what happens. So one man, somebody bumps into me, v'nasan shalom, and he greets me with shalom. So everybody asks, Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, who cares? Why do you have to tell me who says hello? And the classic answer is because the Talmud has a principle that a person should always be the first to greet another person, right? Especially a Talmud Chacham, right? It's menschlich, it's an act of chesed, you're acknowledging somebody, it's an act of anivas, it's humility, you're not waiting for people to come get you, you're greeting others. But Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma he wasn't the first to say hello, and he's pointing that out to us. So why not? Why didn't he say hello first? So the two possibilities. In the 1700s, there's a German rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, in his commentary, the Lechem Shemayim, he says, well, you read it and you think, you might be thinking they're walking towards each other and it's just very nonchalant, but that doesn't have to be the case. Maybe this Jew is actually behind Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. Maybe he saw up ahead and says, oh, there's a Jew. And he would have looked, and Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma would have looked like an identifiable Jew. He would have looked like a rabbi. He had distinctive garb. So he runs after him. So he runs up quickly behind him and he greets him and he says shalom. In other words, Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma didn't have an opportunity to say hello. And he doesn't have the opportunity. To say hello. So, but already you get the image. It's not somebody who just kind of walking, bumps into somebody and remembers, oh, I need a rabbi in town. He's actively running after Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma. The other possibility, so in the 1500s, is Shmuel Diuzida, the famous Medrash Shmuel, one of the best-known commentaries on Pirkei Avos. So he says, it's true. The Talmud says you have to go, you have to greet people, but says, not everybody holds that extends to every human being you meet. And Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma is probably of that view too, that, it's a courtesy that extends to your fellow Jew. And Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, he saw this man and he didn't think he was Jewish. He didn't look like a Jew. If he comes from Caesarea, that could make a lot of sense. Caesarea is a Roman administrative capital. There's lots of Roman culture there, lots of Roman religion. This guy's doing business. Business is good, obviously. He's probably doing a lot of business with the Romans. It's possible he doesn't even look like a Jew anymore. But nasan li shalom. But Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma was telling me, he greeted me with shalom. He greeted me like a Jew. That's how I knew he was Jewish, right? He let a little Yiddish slip. Okay? And what does he say? Zarti lo shalom. I gave him back shalom. Why is that important? Because he didn't look him up and down and say, you're a Jew. Look how you're dressed. He didn't say, I'm busy learning, I don't have time. He was courteous, he was warm. He said, shalom. Once this Jew sees that Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma is ready to receive, is receptive, right away, Rebbi, he says, Meizim Makamata. He says, where are you from? So if we're starting to appreciate that this is more than a little bit of banter and chit chat, so what kind of person runs up to a stranger and says, where are you from? Somebody who's searching for something. And here's a good point just to pause and just to remind you. We said, what did we learn from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah? So we said we learned when Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma lived. And that's important. He said he dies in the Hadrian at the time of the Hadrianic persecutions. He was probably born around the time of the Beis Hamikdash when it was destroyed. And that's very important to underscore because those were terrible, terrible times. His life spans an absolute terrible time in our history. Beis Hamikdash, its destruction came in the middle of something called the First Jewish-Roman War, which was a 7-year war. And the Midrashim and the historians tell us hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed. Many more were sent as slaves all across the Roman Empire. Okay, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. You go from centuries of having a certain stability, have a sense of this is what Yiddishkeit's about, and then that's all thrown in disarray. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say we're living through a Holocaust. And then you have decades following, but there's uncertainty. There's one war and another war, a Bar Kokhba revolt, and then more persecution. These are terrible times. And I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to think there must have been Jews then that just checked out and said, forget it, we're done. All right, we're under Roman occupation, and when that happens, you do as the Romans do. But in all this turmoil, so you have Jews in Syria, Jews in Rome, and they're saying, maybe this Jew left Judaism, maybe his parents left it, they didn't raise him as a Jew. All he knows is he's Jewish. Maybe the Romans made sure that he remembered. So they're looking, they're searching, what's this life about? Where's the meaning? And they're looking for the Yiddishkeit that they had maybe, or the parents had. So he's on the road, he's looking to find Yiddishkeit. So he sees this identifiable Jew, he comes to, he says, where are you from? And we said, Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma, he's a careful listener. So he's reading between the lines. And what does he say? He doesn't tell him, I'm from Tveria, I'm from Yavne. He says, I'm from a city of scholars and sages. In other words, I'm from a city where we have people who are living and breathing Yiddishkeit. And Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma is right. That's exactly what this Jew's after. To that, he says, please come live with us, teach us Torah. I'll give you $1 million. You don't have to interpret that cynically. He's being sincere. He'll give anything. He wants to be reconnected. So when Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma hears the conversation this way, there's no question, he's going. Okay, but to that, he says, you're throwing $1 million at me. That's not why I'm going. I'm not about money. I don't know what the Romans told you about Jews and money. I'm not about money. Because if I go and live anywhere, it's because I'm going to live in a Makom Torah, right? And then so he tells this Jew, I'll go with you. We're going to partner. We're going to build something. And with the commentaries also say, then he starts to tell him what is it based on. He says because it's written in Tehillim that was written by David HaMelech, and all the commentaries wonder what Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma, why are you writing Tehillim that was written by David HaMelech? Everybody knows Tehillim was written by David. Okay, and there are nice inferences that you get from that, but sometimes maybe a simple reading is the best. He's telling this Jew, David HaMelech wrote it because this Jew knows nothing. He's coming from nothing. He doesn't know Aleph base maybe, so he's telling him, he's teaching him. Okay, and he gives him all these psukim, and then finally he says, you have a lot of money to spend. What does Hashem say? Liya kesef v'liya zav nu Hashem tzvakos. Hashem says, silver belongs to me, gold belongs to me. You have money, put it into ruchnias. Says, we're going to build a Makom Torah. And we see from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that's what happened. He follows this Jew to Rome. Suddenly he has Talmidim. So who are these Talmidim? These are the Jews of Rome, learning with Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma. Right? And I like to think, if the Talmidim, there's a yeshiva, maybe this guy's bankrolling the yeshiva. Anyway, and is he turning it into a Makom Torah? So what does he have these students? What are they saying? What are they preoccupied? What are they thinking about? Emasai ben David Ba, when is Mashiach coming? He's got them screaming, we want Mashiach now. And and what did we say in the Gemara and Avodah Zarah? We said the Kol Gedolei Romi, that all the great dignitaries of Rome came to show their respects. The Gedolei Romi, these are the people, right? They see who's this Jew? They come, he's reviving, making these Jews proud. So Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma, he's transforming the town. He has an influence on the Goyim. So we started this talk. We said, SHLICHUS, is it the highest calling? And we were worried. Maybe this Mishnah, maybe he thinks otherwise. Maybe Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma, if he were here, he'd disagree, he'd disapprove. So I hope you agree. There are ways to read this Mishnah that we don't need to worry. And just the very last point, he could have saved us some time. We had to debate, did he go, did he not go? Because he didn't make it explicitly clear. If he went, why didn't he just say, yes, I'll go? Why not make it explicitly clear? So I'll say, the shluchim who go around the globe, go to Nowheresville, go down the block to do what they do, our inspiration, our heroes. But not everybody can go. Not everybody is supposed to go. Not everybody needs to go. Rabbi Yosay ben Kisma, this opportunity came to him. This he was able to do, so he went. But again, that's not the point. It's the conversation he wanted you to see. Wants to see, I went out there, I got out of my yeshiva, I went out, I saw him. What did I find? There are people looking and searching, they want to be reconnected. And that's the key. And he says, that in Pirkei Avos, he's speaking to every Jew. So you can't say, principle, everybody's got to go. No, everybody's got a part in it. Everybody just needs to wake up and realize that people who want to be reconnected. And, I'll go on a limb and say, in his case, he had somebody who chased after him and begged him to learn. I think he would say, even the Jews who are not chasing after you, they're not begging you to learn, the ones who say, I don't need it, I'm not interested, I don't believe, I think he'd say, even them, they're searching too, just keep reading between the lines. Thank you.
Yasher Koyach of Shmuel, and thank you all for joining us. It's wonderful Kinus Torah. Now we're up for Martiv.